Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are all here on the panel. You have Jason, Sabine, and Kayla. We're going to wait just a few seconds to make sure that everyone is joining, and then we'll start with some introduction. Just for you to know, the webinar is being recorded, and we are going to share the recording afterwards. We will also have a few polls throughout the webinar, which I might try to launch one just now so you can start seeing how you can answer those. You should be seeing it on your screen, hopefully. If you do see it, start answering so we can see if that works. It's about AI monitoring, and if you do monitor content at scale with AI. All right, we are going to start the webinar as I see people answering, so everything is working. So the content of today's panel is around the art of creating a safe app, around trust and safety. And we've got 3 experts joining us today who are going to introduce themselves shortly. The whole point of this webinar is that we have a very complex monitoring system that started to emerge to protect users, but also agents from toxic behaviors in games and in apps, primarily because companies saw that as a priority to protect their users, but it even became a legal requirement, which makes it even more of an obligation. And you may be wondering why Helpshift, Keyword Studio, and Two Hats are speaking today about this topic. And we've been working really hard, the 3 companies together, to think about those issues that the industry is facing and see how we can combine our forces and find ways to go even further in helping you protect your community. So from a content moderation perspective, Two Hats allows to moderate content at scale and catching the bulk of the issues that are happening in games and in apps with AI and automation, catching the bulk of the toxicity. Where Helpshift come into the picture is because we have a way of having users report other users when the AI sometimes might not catch 100% of all the issues. There's still ways to get your players to be engaged and report other users, but also using bots and automation to scale further. And then Keywords, who works very closely with Helpshift and Two Hats on the human side and agent side of things, are highly trained with the tools and are helping with the human side to moderate the games and apps. They also have a lot of industry expertise and domain expertise, industry benchmark, which helps the clients to move the needle. So I would like our speakers to introduce themselves today. And also, while you introduce yourself, maybe could you give us a few sentences around what have been your observation of the evolution of trust and safety over the years? Maybe Jason, do you want to start introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jason Copeland. I've been with Helpshift for a little over a year now. But before this, I was actually at Blizzard Entertainment as a manager in their support center for about 16 years. So I do have a lot of experience with the frontline, agent experience in terms of like investigating harassment or even the players themselves harassing the agents. We've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to ramp up how seriously we take those reports and how much attention it gets. And my personal observation is that it's been getting worse in my time on the internet over the last 5 years. And it's becoming more and more important for us to prove to your community that you are taking these reports seriously and you do not tolerate that behavior. That message really can come through with the interactions your agents have with the victims.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. Sabine, would you like to introduce yourself as well, please?
Yes, thank you. So I am with Keywords. I recently started in August, and before I have been working with Two Hat. And so for me, During the time that I started, actually, the topic of moderation was something perceived as control, censorship, maybe even preventing free speech. And driven by that perception or nearly a fear that was there, right? Moderation still happened. So it was happening, but it was behind the scene and often unknowing to the community. Platform. And so within the last 10 years, I've experienced definitely a shift from moderation being something that we don't talk about or that is an individual problem, shifting to this is a global problem. Let's all tackle it together. We are in this together. Let's look for solutions. And competitive gaming companies, they got together and started talking openly about this problem. And organizations like the Fair Play Alliance is just one example. Also, some major industry leaders, they have come together to solve that problem. They self-funded, for example, the Technology Coalition. So there is definitely that shift that I've experienced in moderation, the view, the perspective of moderation. And the other shift I see is the form of moderation. When you look again, 10, 15 years ago, it was done by volunteers, often undertaken even by the developers themselves. And it moved from this form of self-governance to where we are today, that even users and players, they are requesting it. And so with that request and also the tremendous growth in online gaming, platform managers are increasingly sensing a need to demonstrate their commitment to content moderation, and that is where we are today. So there is a request for it, there is a commitment to it, and yeah, moderation is something that is getting more and more attention.
Great, thank you. And Kayla?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Kayla Jarvis. I've been working in the technology industry for quite some time, but with two hats specifically for the last 7 years. I will say when I started, the F word meant filter and not the F word that we all know it as. And thankfully, I've seen that change in my time here. Trust and safety, moderation, moderator well-being, all of that now seems to be in the industry at the forefront. And much like our tagline on my screen, companies know that they need to deal with the negative behavior and they take steps to do that. But more what I'm seeing as a trend in the industry, which is fantastic, is that there is this desire to also amplify the positive. So how can we reward and how can we talk about the good things that are happening in our community, not just the negative things that we see from a behavior perspective? So I'm super excited to be here today.
Awesome, thank you so much. So to go back to the root of the issue and more back in time, what sort of issues do companies need to protect their users and agents from, either in games, because we know it's a huge problem for some gaming companies, but also a few app categories are facing some of those issues, just to set the scene and the context. Sabine, maybe?
Yeah, let me answer this question very general. So what do we see on the internet and what we are asked basically to remove from the internet? It starts with cyberbullying, with hate speech, with illegal activities, so trading prohibited goods, illegal substances, toxic, abusive language, also against moderators, even scams, different forms of threats, racial comments, sexual harassment, child grooming, sexual exploitation, self-harm related content, and then also images, videos of violence, physical threats. So really, it's a broad spectrum. It also depends then on each platform, what they want to remove or not, but those are just a few examples that we are dealing with.
Awesome. Do you have anything to add, Kayla, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the years that we've been doing this, what we've noticed is everything that Sabine has said, for sure, but also that for different communities, disruptive behavior can mean different things. So in some communities, it is the toxic content that we're seeing in chat or in comments, image and video sharing. But sometimes it's also a type of behavior like a spammy behavior or a flooding behavior. Essentially anything that takes away from the intended benefit, the intended behavior within any given community. What does that look like? And then how can we take steps to prevent against that? So toxicity in chat, absolutely. But again, especially as we look to Web3 and the metaverse, disruptive behavior can look very different in that landscape than it can in, say, chat.
Perfect. Jason, do you want to add anything else? Or, yeah.
Yeah, that was a pretty comprehensive answer from both Sabine and Kayla. The one thing I would want to add on top of that is, so all of those examples that they just listed, what's going to happen after that abuser or whoever receives a penalty? They're going to talk to your agents. They're going to demand, in some cases, that it's overturned, or they're going to try to argue their case that they did not actually do what they were accused of, or it wasn't as bad as we're making it out to be, just you name it. They're going to try very hard to get their account back. I'd say a majority of customers penalized may learn their lesson after the first or second time and then be a good player from then on. But there is going to be a subset of that community that is doing it for their own personal enjoyment, or perhaps they just have no self-control, but they're going to end up harassing your agents on a regular basis. And that's something that we saw quite a lot.
Thank you all for your responses. And I think with the severity of the cases that you mentioned and the gravity, that's why we all have this in our heart to make it as good as possible and see how we can help companies to deal with those issues, which are not light issues, obviously. So it's going to lead us to the second question, which is around how technology and people can actually help with those issues of trust and safety in apps and protecting not only the end users, but also the agents. So maybe we'll start with Kayla, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, I shared a slide with you, perhaps the one with the 5 layers. If you could bring that up, that would be great. When we look at content moderation from the Two Hat perspective, it is really a holistic approach to that mindset. So it's not just one magic thing that's going to solve the challenges that you're facing within your community, whatever those may be. Rather, it's a holistic approach, looking at all the different things in our best practices that you need to do to protect. So the first one is setting very clear community guidelines. And there's fantastic examples of these in many games that we see online, where guidelines are at the forefront, not tucked away under terms and services where we have to go deal and we all check that box without reading them, but something that you have to look at right at the beginning before you can participate or sign up for a particular game. The second one is to use technologies such as Two Hat and Community Sift, which is you need to classify and filter the really nasty content. So use technology where it makes sense to use technology. Sift out the terrible stuff. Agents don't need to see that. Moderators don't need to see that. Community members don't need to see that. And then obviously allowing the very good, obvious stuff to go through automatically. And then you have that middle part, that gray zone where people, humans, can provide context. User reputation. What is a player? How is a player behaving within that game? Can we take a look at how we can provide guidance to them based on their behavior? And reputation is one way that we can build on that holistic view of an individual. Allow your community to have a voice. So user-reported content, allowing community members to report each other for what they feel may be offensive. This allows a really great lens into your community and how they react to certain content. You may think it's terrible or you may think it's safe, and your community may react differently to that. And finally, what we're seeing is transparency. This is going to be regulated, if it's not where you are already, by government, and being able to provide reports on what you're doing to protect your community. So all of those different layers help to build that holistic viewpoint.
Perfect, thank you. And then you talked a little bit about the human aspects. I'm sure, Sabine, you have a lot more to add on that aspect.
Yes, gladly. I'll answer that question, as you mentioned, from the human side, the human aspects. And if we think of our moderators, which are really like superhero moderators, right? They ensure the user's safety. And they create online spaces that are inviting, that are accessible, that increase user participation, user engagement. And they do that by sorting and classifying user-generated information and evaluating it also against the rules of the platform, as well as really the larger open world, like social, cultural norms, also legal norms and mandates, right? And so with that in mind, I would answer the question, how can we protect agents and app users? Because if you take care, first of all, take care of your employees, like focus on employee resilience, because if you have healthy moderators, they will then ensure a healthy online landscape. So it starts here at Keywords actually with the recruitment process. So start the process of building a resilient employee from the get-go, from the point of hiring. And then also employee resilience programs to support the mental health and well-being, specifically keeping in mind what they can be exposed to, some of the topics we mentioned before, and promote self-care. So focus on that. And the second point is a safe handling and reporting practice. And Kayla just mentioned the importance of technology, which actually limits the amount of time that moderators are exposed to harmful content. And so technology can take care of the worst, and then humans come in where there are gray areas or cultural specifics where a machine is not able to distinguish between that.
Great, thank you. And then Jason, probably on the user voice side of things and the protection of agents, you might have a few things to add to that.
Yeah, definitely. Because I was thinking about this quite a bit on like what I would like to contribute to the discussion. My favorite part about this whole thing is the trust aspect of it, right? So how do you get your community to trust that you're creating a safe environment if what they're experiencing is the opposite of what you say? How do you prove to them that it is being handled, right? I mean, we know we're never going to prevent all harassment, all bad language or bad behavior 100% of the time. Maybe someday if, machine learning gets really good, but at the end of the day, you still need people to come in and tell an agent or tell your company what's happening. So they need to feel like they got to tell their story, that they got to provide all the necessary details, and that the person that they're speaking with actually believes them and is backing them up and is going to take the report seriously and do something about it. An example would be, when I was at Blizzard, there's a lot of technology, without going into proprietary information, there's a lot of technology that they use in order to catch cheating and automation within the game that could bans way more than human beings could ever begin to investigate on their own. Thousands and thousands and thousands of penalties a month. But then there were still bots in the game. And so the customers were very unhappy and thought we weren't doing anything about it. And so it became very important that we allowed them to continue reporting them directly to our game masters, because they needed to feel like they were part of the solution. They wanted to see it for themselves. They wanted to actually see it in action. And so, that whole process is critical, because you could be investing so much effort and money and time into technology that is working, but if your community doesn't know it, then are you really gaining the benefit from it, right? So something to consider too is that the victims are going to be contacting your agents and wanting this assistance. So the attitude and the tone and how you speak with them, how you interact with them is going to be very important. So like Sabine said, with having resilient agents, happy agents, who are well taken care of, they're going to be a lot more likely to be sympathetic, empathetic with the customer, and hold that conversation in a way that makes them feel a little bit better, maybe de-escalate them a little bit. So yeah, and I really like Kayla. One of the things I've always been a big proponent of is public codes of conduct. I noticed in like Discord, for example, most days you can't even really join unless you read all the rules and click an emoji that says you agree with it, and then you get added to all the channels. Like that is super important to have. It needs to be easily accessible where anybody can find it.
Perfect. Thank you, all of you. So thinking about the gaming space, because a lot of our companies work closely with a lot of the top gaming companies in the world, and they're quite prone, depending on the type of games, to misbehavior and toxic behavior in some games. And also they have to handle a huge scale most of the time with a huge amount of players. So that's where the AI and automation is critical to be able to scale and moderate all those chats. Have we got any best practices that we've learned from the mobile gaming space that can be applied to other type of app categories, being dating apps or social network apps or news, or that kind of apps that are also prone to toxic behaviors? Maybe Sabine, do you want to start?
Sure, just finding the unmute button here. And it is actually something that both Jason and Kayla mentioned. So as a best practice, and having worked in both, basically both sides, so the technology, also the human side, is for me combine AI and HI, human intelligence, and let each do what it does best. So if you think about technology, right, it never gets tired. It handles large volumes of data, specifically keeping in mind the recent like tremendous growth of data volumes, of online games, of platforms. It reduces the human exposure to toxic content, to harmful content, as we mentioned before. And then the humans, they have the ability to contextualize, putting things into context. They can look at those gray areas, understand cultural nuances. They are aware of bias, also a very important area to be aware of. They identify threats, and then also they escalate threats or interact with users. And so for me, it's like move from, often we say, well, is it automated moderation versus human moderation? It is automated moderation and human moderation. So that is one of the first best practices that I would say. And then again, from a human perspective, with moderators playing such a key role in moderation, it is important also to understand the interconnectiveness between healthy users, safe and inviting platforms, and healthy moderators. And if you're able to share the screen, Sarah, I just visualized it a little bit, because if you keep users safe, right, or to keep them safe, it actually requires healthy moderators whose task is, as I mentioned before, to evaluate user-generated content against the rules of the platform or the code of conduct. And then taking care of their well-being, because it's just a matter of time until they will be actually exposed to harmful content. Having safety plans like tailored to the individual that supports them in dealing with abusive language, harmful content, escalating threats, right? So that is one part, focusing on the healthy moderators and investing into highly skilled, well-equipped moderators. That will then make or ensure the player's safety, and then also the brand reputation, because users want to spend time there. So you can't take care of one without neglecting the other. And there is that saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And I think it is, this is definitely the case here. And then the second one is ensure a safe handling and reporting practice. That is what I mentioned also before, like what are the legal requirements for a specific country to report a certain threat, what information is needed. And then also think maybe about establishing a safety team, basically a dedicated team that handles escalation and ensures also that all new products and services comply with your platform safety policies and also some the legal obligations. So those are the best practices that I recommend.
Thank you so much. Jason, would you like to go next?
Yeah. So like best practices in apps, right? I mean, I talked about before about you're going to have customers reporting these problems to you, but you need to be able to filter them in a way that takes those reports and puts them exactly where they need to be, right? Are your more urgent or severe issues, are those being filtered to the top to get assistance right away, such as a threat of real life harm or suicide or something very extreme? You're going to want to be able to catch that right away. But that all begins like by making it super easy to report. I've seen a lot of really good examples where in some apps you can tap on a username and get a context menu, report a player that way, or you can even just open up an issue as long as the support button is easy to find and visible, say in the first page of the settings menu. Just make it really easy for your players to go in and report. You want them to feel like it's welcome and that you're actively reviewing these reports. And then you got to let them categorize the type of issue. I mean, let your customer tell you what's going on. You want opportunities for them to select, like, is this bad language? Is this targeted harassment? Is it physical? Is it real life? What have you, right? Let them explain it to you. And then from there, you want to automate all of that segmentation and routing. You don't want anybody sitting there reading every single report and then deciding who it needs to go to. You want that to be a completely automated process. So you're going to have every report coming in is going to be labeled based on the category the customer selects. You can even have certain keyword searches that will pull out critical ones, such as real life harm, that maybe didn't get categorized correctly, since you don't want to let those slip through the cracks. Or does somebody have just a mildly bad name with a bad word in it? Maybe that one can wait in line behind all the other more urgent issues, right? But ultimately, it's just about making sure that you have these specific processes built for every type of user report. You kind of get an idea of what's going to need to happen if you have a real life threat, or if you have a report of suicide, versus if you have some bad language, it simply needs to be taken care of. You're going to need specific bits of information in order to be able to address every single one of those reports on the first contact. So you need those processes set up to request those details from the customer, whether that's a custom bot or a form you have them fill out, whatever it may be. You want full detailed description in their own words. You want how they categorize it. You're going to want timestamps and dates, usernames, any context that will help your agent investigate and locate the violation. And then from there, apologies, I lost my train of thought there. But yeah, essentially, you can even make API calls that would request information from your backend system. So you could create a special bot process for an alert or something if there's like a real life threat and you need the legal team to look at some stuff or report it to the FBI or whatever you do for those situations. You can have API calls create a JIRA ticket with all the necessary information, whatever system that team uses in order to process and monitor them. The other idea I had was creating a special bot for players who were already penalized and had been upheld, and we know that they're supposed to be out of the game. They're still going to require legally some kind of support, such as GDPR, privacy requests. You could create a bot that would then make an API call to say, is this customer currently on timeout? And if they are, they're going to get routed to a special bot that will never go to an agent. It will just provide them the limited options for service that they have. You can even have an API call request how much time is left on their penalties, and it can inform the customer, hey, you're not going to be able to interact with support or play the game for X amount of time, right? So yeah, it's important to just be creative and figure out what is going to shorten the distance between the problem and the solution as much as possible. You want to go from the victim experience something horrible, and then the moment they get in touch with support, they're feeling better, they trust that it's being taken care of, and no one really had to do anything to monitor those processes. It just arrived where it needed to go, and the agent took care of it, right?
Awesome, thank you. Kayla, would you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think Sabine and Jason really covered a lot of it. And the common theme that I hear between it all is technology and humans. So what I would add to that is plan for the worst and hope for the best. So coming back to setting the tone of your community right from the get-go, what is that safety that you're looking for? What is that balance between expressivity and safety? And it really is different for every community. And also think when you're creating your social app, your entertainment app, your dating app, your game, Are there areas within that where people might be interacting differently? So do you have a public lobby room or global chat? Do you have an area where groups can go off and interact together? Do you have an area where they could perhaps talk one-on-one with each other? And allowing that balance, again, of expressivity and safety to be different for each of those areas. So in global, perhaps you need to be a little more restrictive. Everybody's coming on. It's the first time somebody is welcoming to your environment. Do they want to be bombarded with nastiness, or do they want a safe and welcoming place? As we look to growing your reach and your retention within your community, if the first experience they have is a negative one, then there's a very strong likelihood that they won't stay, or they certainly won't spread the word on how good it is. So plan for the worst, hope for the best, set the tone right from the beginning. And I think what Sabine and Jason both touched on really well is making sure that there is accountability. So if somebody is behaving negatively, if I do report somebody, does something happen with that information, or is it just gone out into the black hole of nothingness?
Great, thank you. So going to the next question, most of our clients, if not all, have to manage a user base that is all over the world and speaking multi-languages, which add another level of complexity into the moderation, into the support side of things. So could you give us a few ideas, Jason, of how Helpshift and technology in general can help with multi-languages?
Yeah, so I mean, the basic multi-language support we have right now, just out of the box, you know, we do have something called text templates that you can create or write a message and then also translate that messages in the multiple languages that you support so that you can then use it in a bot, so that anybody going through this bot process is going to receive instructions in their native language. But that is sort of manual, but it is there as an option. Same thing with the code of conduct, having, you know, the correct language of the code of conduct being served to the user when they're viewing it. But then also recently we started a partnership with a company called Kantan AI, where they're able to, we have an integration with the Chrome extension that allows the agents to be able to not only translate the entire dashboard into their, you know, operating language. So if you have a Spanish agent, they can have the dashboard in Spanish, but it would also allow them to translate messages. It automatically detects whatever the customer said, and then the user or the agent can click a button and it translates that message for them. Same goes for when they go to reply, they can type out the reply in their language and then click translate, and it'll translate it into the language that the customer wants to read, and they can communicate that way. That, of course, also, you know, there's going to be some limitations in there. I think when you're talking about really obvious violations, that might be easy for non-native speakers to pick up. But I think, you know, as we've discussed in some of the other answers, there's going to be other bias, nuance, cultural differences that maybe a native speaker doesn't have. So there is some limitations there, and that there is going to be some benefit to having a proper moderation team that can actually understand the context of the various harassment or cultures in other languages.
Cool. Kayla, anything else to add on your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you're creating an app or a game, your goal is to have a global product, something that people are interacting with all across the world. And language support, localization is very, very important. It's something at 2HAT that we actually take very seriously. It's one of our largest teams. When we're looking at offering language support, to Jason's point, technology to a degree can handle it from translation. What we've done is we've hired native in-house speakers that will actually support that language, understanding, just as Jason said, the cultural nuances, looking for trends that are happening across the globe, making sure that English and Turkish and Korean are equally supported and equally as robust. And then using that information, you can also, from a language perspective, ensure that your communities across the globe are being protected in the same way. So standardizing that language across the board as well. I always enjoyed working with Sabine when she was at Two Hat. When we talked about language, she always used very interesting examples of how translation alone didn't work between English and German. And there was always some funny examples of that.
Great. Sabine, anything else to add?
Yeah, I think Jason and Kayla, they covered it. And as Kayla was actually talking, I was thinking back of some of these examples. But Jason, you mentioned Kantan AI. We definitely utilize that. But then also we have agents all over the world with coverage beyond the most common languages used on the internet. And I haven't met one moderator who doesn't speak at least 2, 3, 4 languages here within Keywords. And also, we have worked, it's great with Two Hat having the language team in-house, right? Even there, we have worked on projects together where moderators were working with the language specialist and just seeing the beauty of making a product even stronger from a language perspective, focusing on those areas that Kayla just mentioned, right? Cultural nuances, even machine translation, where machine translation isn't as strong. So there is definitely coverage for languages.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to skip the next question because I can see that we're running out of time. We're getting quite a lot of questions. So I want to make sure that we have enough time at the end to answer the audience questions. So let's just focus on KPI a little bit because I know it's quite an important question for most of our clients. Where should we be focusing on to measure success in terms of trust and safety, in terms of KPIs, or even like what happens if you do not solve those issues? Maybe Jason, do you want to start?
Yeah, I guess like for my experience, it's going to be very much about the basic call center statistics, right? How do you make sure, like I said before, shorten the distance between problem and solution? You want that to be near instant in some cases, right? But how do you measure whether or not you're actually doing that? How do you measure if the changes you made is actually making the improvements you hope for, right? You just got to go back to basics, like the customer satisfaction. There are categories in their own issues, and hopefully you're segmenting them in a very granular way that allows you to get that kind of visibility into each of the issue types and how they're performing. So is a particular category receiving bad survey scores? Why, right? Do those customers feel like that report category is not being taken as seriously? Are there any maybe macros or canned responses that just simply aren't working for that category? Maybe the bot's not friendly enough, who knows, right? But it's up to you to sort of monitor that data, and having that segmentation is what's going to allow you to really drill down deep into those categories to figure out how you can improve the experience for each of them. Same thing with time to resolve and time to first response. That's how will be referred to them in HelpShift. I'm sure other call centers measure them and maybe call them different things, but ultimately it's how quickly did we get to them and how quickly did it take to solve the problem. The longer a customer waits on a report, the less likely they're going to believe that you do something about it, because it just seems like you're not prioritizing it, which is okay for minor offenses. But for the extreme ones, you want to make sure that that response time is down, that you're getting to them as quickly as possible. Same thing with the resolution. If it feels like it takes a long time for you to finally come back and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and take care of this, probably not as relevant as some other more complicated solutions you need to provide, but at the end of the day, they want to feel like that it was easy, it was seamless, and they walk away trusting that it's going to be taken care of.
Perfect, thank you. Sabine?
Yeah, Jason, as Jason just said, actually trust and safety, right? It affects so many areas and you can measure so many things. But I want to go back or answer that question, going back to the interconnectedness between like healthy moderators, as the safety of users, brand reputation, and if the priority, which is, it's not an if, but our priority is, right, a healthy online environment where users are safe and engaged. And this requires, as we know, a solid moderation system, like humans and tools. And if left unintended, actually, there will be a future bill to pay in the form of damaged workers and even more frightening social media gaming landscape, and also churning users. And these are exactly the 3 points that I would focus on and measure it. So engage with your fan base, right? That's the first thing, like get their feedback. That could be measured in amount of reports. Jason spoke into that. The type of reports, do users feel safe? Are they engaged? Do you have transparent community guidelines, code of conduct, right? Then the resilient workforce. What's your employee turnover? Measure the reasons, look into the reasons for it, sick days, burnout. And then also technology and moderation tools, like measure the amount of time that employees are exposed to harmful content. Do these moderation tools make it easier to report the reporting practices, or does it make it more cumbersome? And then also measure the compliance with mandatory legal regulations even. So we know about, like it was this October, 5 years that the Facebook Act, or the Network Enforcing Act, came into effect, right, in Germany, where you have to remove hate speech within 24 hours if you have over 2 million users. So those are just a few areas that you can measure. But also going back the step even before measuring KPIs, make sure you have that community guideline in place that Kayla talked about, Jason talked about, and also that you have moderation in place. So those are the things to start with.
Thank you. Kayla?
Yeah, I mean, both Sabine and Jason covered a lot of it for sure. I get the question a lot when I'm talking to people in terms of how do you measure KPI? And because each community is unique, it's a little bit different for everybody. So it can be very challenging to measure it. But what you want to think about ultimately when we're creating games and creating apps is for them to be successful. So everything that Sabine and Jason talked about, absolutely. But how can you use 3 different services like ours to increase your retention, to increase your revenue? That's the ultimate goal. How can you decrease costs? You know, when we're looking at products at scale, then these measurables, these metrics, how can we achieve them? Part of it is understanding the benchmark. So perhaps with your counterparts in your industry or in your genre, how much toxicity, for example, can we expect in any given genre of a game? As my game, am I above that? Am I below that? If I'm above it, what can I do to change it? What changes can I implement? What practices can I implement to reduce the amount of toxicity, for example? We, of course, want to keep people safe online from harmful content, and that can mean so many different things. So you being able to measure accuracy, for example, being able to respond in real time, whether it's with technology or moderation or support. And then, of course, coming back to understanding language and culture. If you can measure that across all of your different communities as you reach out globally, then you're able to start building an understanding of how successful your app or your game is being.
Perfect, thank you. So very briefly, I know a lot of our clients are at different stages of the creation of their apps or their games. When and how would you say you need to start thinking about your trust and safety strategy? And maybe we'll take 1 or 2 answers to speed up a little bit.
I think all of us would probably say the same thing. As soon as you can. Start thinking safety by design at the very beginning. Think of safety features, think of trust and safety. What can you put into place to protect your community members, to protect your brand, to protect your moderation team, your community management team? Jason and Sabine, if you have something to add to that.
Yeah, just really emphasizing the benefit of it. Exactly, Kayla, because community guidelines, right? They create transparency of what are the rules and also clarity, what will happen. Just think of a soccer game. We need that to play successful games. We need to know what the rules are and what happens. But the benefit is also, if you do it right at the beginning, once you start growing, you can then focus on scaling. You can then really focus on the scale instead of catching up and trying, now I need to create those community guidelines and or the code of conduct. So that will free up your time in your growth to focus on scalability if you do it right from the get-go.
Perfect, thank you.
I just have a quick thing to add to that, and that I think we all know for the live games that we've supported, it's much more difficult to get engineering resources to do something for customer support after the game is live. Maybe not everyone has the same experience, but I think that's pretty common, right? At the very beginning, there's less crunch, there's more willingness to plan, there's more cooperation between the teams and customer support and other departments. So that's a really good opportunity to get the technology that you have in mind built into the framework of the game itself, so that you can do things like Sabine said, like scale. Because do you want your system to be able to do advanced checks on account statuses? What types of data do you want to collect on these customers to help automate? Pretty much anything that you sit down and think that you want to be able to achieve for your customers, and if whatever technology is going to help you get there, should be a part of the conversation from the very beginning, so that it's a part of the game's foundation.
Perfect, thank you. And would any of you have some examples of particularly successful clients that are monitoring their apps and their games? Maybe Jason or Kayla, do you want to share some examples?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple of examples. We have a popular augmented reality game developer that does kind of exactly what I was describing before. Customers know exactly what they can do to report bad behavior, and then they're given a series of questions to describe their issue in detail. The bot just requests every single piece of data that the agent's going to need, all the way up to and including screenshots or videos if they have evidence of it like that they can then attach to the issue. So by the time the agent gets it, every single report they get is a full, robust, detailed explanation of what they need to do, what they need to look for, right? I have another interesting case where they do online card games, and there's competitive matches, so they're session-based, and sometimes they report players of cheating. And so what they'll do is the agents actually would like them to go to their match history within the app. And this kind of goes back to this should be a part of the framework when you're building the game. They allow users to look at a match history, and then they can click a button or tap a button on the match history that copies a lot of context that the agent's going to need. It has like user IDs, session IDs. That way it's really simple for them to locate exactly where they should be investigating, instead of just like it happened 2 days ago, I think around 2 p.m. in my time zone. Like, that's so much more difficult to investigate. And I like their solution to it, which actually helps them save a lot of time.
Great.
That's awesome, Jason. I would say everyone that is using 2Apps Community Sift is doing a good job and has it at the forefront of their mind, which is fantastic. We have a couple examples though, and I shared a couple of use cases of clients that are taking it a little bit above and beyond. So dealing with the negative, absolutely. But again, as it says up there in the tagline, amplifying the positive as well. So what are they doing, or how are they using different technologies, different products to recognize those that are always helpful, welcoming, positively engaging. And those two particular case studies you can click through onto the website give a different lens into how to shift our thought a little bit towards having to obviously deal with the negative, but then how can we also use technology to find out what good things are happening. The majority of the content that we see coming through SIFT is positive. People are using games and platforms for the way that they were intended. So how can we mine that information and reward those folks that are doing it that way?
Great. Sabine, would you want to add anything else?
It's probably more a summary of what Kayla and Jason said, because when I look at our clients, the ones who are successful, I was actually looking into what do they have? What do they do, right? And first, they have a clear vision of what they want their community to be. We talked about that. What are they going to foster? Then they have effective feedback loops. They are in touch with their community, with the client base. And then they're looking into technology moderation tools as well as human moderation. And this is where also like services provided by HelpShift, by Community Sift 2 Head with Community Sift, and also keywords will allow actually for that seamless user experience. And so that's the beauty where we all fit in from the different angles. And that's what I see successful clients do. They take care of all these three areas.
Great, awesome. So to go back to Kayla's point about how to build a kinder and positive gaming or app community, that was actually my last question, and wanted to understand a bit more, because we know the industry is heading that way. Do any of you would like to add any more to this piece of the puzzle?
Yeah. What makes my heart sing working in this industry for as long as I have is, just as you said, Sarah, seeing that shift. So what are things that companies are doing, that community management teams are doing to enhance that positive? We have examples within our client base where they have used SIFT to specifically call out a particular behavior when we were in lockdown and play together apart. So when their community members use that particular phrase, they would get a badge or a star or an up level or a gem or something. Not only does that make them feel good, but then other people strive to mimic that behavior so that they can then also get that same reward. So it's now amplifying that positive behavior and pushing it out into the greater community and really encouraging people to behave the way that you've intended for them.
Great. Anything else to add, Jason or Sabine?
I agree with what Kayla said, definitely. And now thinking of the human part, moderation part, just imagine, right? If that, like, the negative has been taken care of, and now we are able to focus and to reinforce the positive behavior, being able to nominate people or focusing on those reports where maybe we get a report where we nominated a person that was specifically supportive during a difficult time or a difficult level in a game. So just imagine that online environment where we encourage positive customer participation and have that focus more on the positive instead of the negative.
Perfect.
I would even just add too, I mean, those are really great answers. And from something that we've done before, I've done before, is you allow your agents to make decisions on when somebody is behaving really good or being super polite or being just a very good customer to work with. You know, you always find that person who's just going through something really bad or really difficult. It's very frustrating. It could be a bug or a technical issue, but they're being really patient the whole time, cooperative, and just otherwise still being a good spirit. Like, rewarding that behavior is going to be really important, right? So we would allow agents to, use their judgment to provide some little extra like reward, like Kayla was saying, like a gem or this or that, or just something that's not super, powerful in game or anything that gives somebody an unfair advantage, but just as like a little token of appreciation. And it really does go a long way. So having some sort of program or policy that would give, agents freedom to thank their players for being good customers. I've seen a lot of good success from that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we don't have much time, and we've had a few questions from the audience. I just want to make sure we have some time to answer those. So the first one was, how do you leverage user reputation in the community to control bad behavior? Does any one of you would like to add some answers to that?
I can start with that one. So reputation to us is very important, and it's based solely on the behavior of an individual in game. What we know is that it's actually very few people that are intent on causing harm. The majority of people in your game or in your app are there to have fun, are there for the purpose of what you created it for. So rather than having to limit the expressivity of the majority of the folks, is there a way that you can, based on the behavior of an individual, take an action against that person? So if we look at it for combating the negative, perhaps that person can still participate in your game, participate in your app, but what they're allowed to say is a little more restricted because they've demonstrated that they're intent on causing harm, that they're looking to be negative in your app. I almost think of it as a stage before muting somebody. So they can still chat, they can still participate, they just don't have the same level of expressivity allowed to them because of how they behaved. And if you flip that over to the positive, you can use that same reputation system to then amplify and recognize, as Sabine and Jason said, those people that are contributing in a positive way, that are being super helpful. And then you can use that to amplify, again, star, reward, badge, all those different types of things.
Great. Anything else, Jason, Sabine, or should we go to the next question? Okay, awesome. So how do you use technology to filter the content of live metaverse environments? Are there any technology on the Two Hats side, perhaps, that can help with that? Or do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, the metaverse, Web3, it's definitely a hot topic of conversation. There are existing games out there where practices have been put in place that use, again, a combination of humans and technology to moderate that. When I think of the metaverse these days, I think of how we behave together in that 3D space. Part of it terrifies me, but part of it also lets me lean towards how can we think outside the box to use technology. In the metaverse clients that we support already, more of that is text-based. And when we come to audio, when we come to physical behavior, it's something that we're working on extensively to understand how we can continue to support clients in that space. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of the practices that these three companies here are doing and other companies are doing can be applied, but we also need to think of that extra little special something with the metaverse, with how we interact together.
Perfect, thank you. Anything else to add, Jason or Sabine, or? No, awesome. So I'm just gonna put a slide on the screen with the key takeaway of today's session around trust and safety being like an integral part of player experience, and basically you warn or remove the bad actors as early as possible to build your healthy and loyal community as a key takeaway. Obviously, what we talked a lot about was leveraging the synergies between technology and humans to work together at their best. And then the key trend in the industry around encouraging the good and obviously discouraging the bad behavior, but delivering a positive user experience and reinforcement leading to positive behavior. I wanted to thank you all three and all attendees today for joining us and doing this session. I've just put a quick link at the end for a Helpshift free trial if you're interested on setting up a few bots. Our teams are here to help you, seeing how you can set up report systems automatically in your app, in your game, to make sure that your users are ready to help building a safer community. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a great day or a great evening for the ones that are based in Europe. And we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Sabine and Jason. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Bye.
Bye.